welcome back to the Growing Revolution. I'm Eric Olson with Smart Pot Fabric Planters, and this week our guest is Brandon Rust of Bokashi Earthworks. He's passionate about organic farming, especially for the cannabis industry. We've been working with him, especially on living soil raised beds for his customers in Oklahoma and beyond. So, Brandon, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. I appreciate you having me on. For anybody who's not familiar with Bokashi Earthworks, you can check us out on Instagram at Bokashi Earthworks and Facebook as well.
Nice. So I saw previously that you grew up as a punk rock kid in San Diego, and were you always interested in organic gardening, or when did that really start for you?
Well, I would have to say that when I was in high school, I did take a ag class, but it was just one of those electives where we knew we could kind of just screw around and not have to do much. My organic gardening actually didn't start until later. I had already been cultivating cannabis. I did, hydroponics for 11 years, and then I switched to using soil in I think 2011 or 2012. And then I was using soil, and I was still using fertigation salts, I was still using things like I think the last line that I used was house and garden nutrients, and I did that for a couple of years before I fully switched over to organics, and that was in 2014.
Was that in California or in Oklahoma?
That was in San Diego. I didn't come out to Oklahoma until 2019.
Okay, nice. What brought you out to Oklahoma?
Well, I actually did a prison term back in California for manufacturing. I was making hash. I was making, BHO, and I didn't get caught actually doing anything. It was a completely unrelated incident that a sheriff showed up to my house. It was for something that happened with a neighbor, actually. Long story short, I ended up with doing an 18-month prison term for making hash. And let's see, I think I got busted in like 2015, but I went on the run. I think I moved out to like Alpine, and I had a grow out there, and I was kind of living on the run for about 14 or 15 months. Then I did my prison term or whatever in county jail, because it's really weird how things work in San Diego County. Like California actually altogether. The prison systems were so full that they stopped housing nonviolent offenders, and so people essentially could just be released. And then what ended up happening was the state the counties pick it up, and the sheriffs agree to house long-term inmates in their jail facilities. So that's what they were doing. But I got out November of 2018, and I went to work for a friend of mine. His family owned a flooring company, and then I was doing that for a couple of months, and then one of my old partners needed somebody to run one of the grows that he had going. So I started doing that again, and then I just kind of put myself out there on Instagram. I found out about that. This is probably early in 2019 I found out about that. And I just started doing some education stuff, because I'd been, at that point, I had already been cultivating for like 18 years. And I just did that, put myself on blast, started going to some, cannabis events and stuff. And I met some folks out in Oklahoma, and eventually they had called me up because they needed some help, and I signed a contract to work with that company. And I did that for a year and a half. And I just started doing different stuff. I had my brought my company, Bokashi Earthworks, with me from California, but it was never incorporated. It was more of just kind of a hobby kind of deal. And I got it all incorporated out here in Oklahoma when I moved out. And so I've been doing that. I do consulting. I have another company called Earthworks uh, Agriculture, and it's a consulting LLC. So I do, um, you know, I just do, field soils, potting soils, cannabis. I can do other crops. It doesn't really matter what it is. So I do
Yeah.
the agronomy with a really strong focus on what I call biological crop steering, which is using certain types of microbes to elicit certain reactions in the plant, while also helping with the out competition of negative pathogens and things like that in the
Nice. Yeah.
soil.
You work with nature and almost, it's almost easier to grow your plants rather than fighting it. Uh, how are you finding your customers then, or are they finding you?
Well, I have a pretty decent following on social media. So on Instagram, my main account, rust.brandon, kind of just like you would see on the bottom left of the screen right there. It's my IG profile, and I have a good following there. So I do educational content and stuff. I haven't been doing too much right now. I haven't been doing a lot of advertising because we're working on redoing all of our labeling. And so when we do that, we have to resubmit everything to the ag department. And so
Oh yeah.
while we're in that process, we're not selling any of the products. So we're working on that. It should be completed here. We're just waiting for the final approval on things like the microbe inoculants, the humate fertilizers, the surfactants. We have a bunch of soil amendments and stuff that are available.
Yeah.
But we also sell soil, which is great too, because like people that are your customers are potentially my customers as well, because we operate in the same space. And one of the things that I specialize in is the soil building, and it's based off of agronomic data. So what we do is when we originally formulated all of the recipes, I started with a base recipe, and I sent that off to the lab. And what I'm looking to do is meet a certain target, which is the baseline for hemp cannabis. And so I started with the baseline, and I said, oh, hey, this is, I need a little bit more of this to meet the target. I need a little bit more of this. And so we'll add, based off of, the same data that I use for agronomy. If I know I need, 10 ppm more of calcium, I might use something like wollastonite or gypsum, or maybe even bone meal, depending on the circumstance. And I know that, like for gypsum, for instance, if I add one cup, per yard of, or a point, if I add 0.3 cups of gypsum per yard of soil, I know that it's going to increase 1 yard of soil 10 calcium ppm. And so I have those types of, a key for every single nutrient. And so when I'm looking at the data, I can just correlate it to the target, correlate it to what I need, and then add to that baseline, so that when we do our blending, we come up with an exact recipe that's going to meet that target. So we have
Nice.
a consistent product that is able to be used, for the cultivation side for, I wouldn't say a water only soil, because that's really, really hard to achieve, especially with organics. And that's because some of these processes are really highly biologically dependent. For instance, the the ability for the phosphate anion, which is P2O5. It has to be liberated from parent appetite material in soil. It's highly biologically dependent process, because we're not dealing with any natural weathering or chemical weathering of these soils, because typically we're indoor.
Hmm.
Unless we're outdoor with them, then you might get some rain and stuff that'll help with that. But mostly it's the microbial weathering or the microbial cycling and the release of secondary metabolites from different types of microbes in soil that solubilize the inorganic phosphorus to liberate the phosphate anion that's metabolically available to the plant. And so, having something like a microbial inoculant is in the programs I run pretty vital. And that's because that phosphorus, well, it doesn't need to be extremely high. It needs to be consistently available because it offers energy. Essentially, the main process is for ATP production, adenine triphosphate, which is the energy exchange currency for all the biological processes. It offers the plant energy. And so when you're using like a microbial inoculant, like the Micro Plus, that we have from Bokashi Earthworks, it's a consortium of different bacillus species. It's a purple non-sulfur bacteria, which is a photosynthetic. One of the modes of metabolism is photosynthesis, so it can utilize carbon dioxide and sunlight to create more complex organic compounds like auxin, cytokinin, gibberellic acids, phytohormones and things of that nature, and enzymes that help solubilize different elements and make them more available. And then it also has a fermentive yeast. And so when you do that, it helps with aiding in microbial diversity in those soils. It really helps outcompete, the bad stuff that's in there, the pathogens, while cycling nutrients and aiding in the availability of a lot of the nutrients that are in the soil.
Yeah. Organic gardening without the microbials, you need both, 100%. So you have a ton of organic chemistry knowledge, which I always struggled with organic chem. Where did you gain your knowledge from?
Reading books.
Nice. Just going to the library and checking out books?
Yeah, so a lot of what I do too is I have a lot of things like this, which are science white papers, and I read through these. And a lot of times what would happen in the very beginning when I first started getting into this, when I was pulling research papers and stuff, they were very difficult for me to read and understand.
For most people they are.
You have to go down. I went down a lot of rabbit holes to figure out what all of these things meant. It is the combination of me consistently reading books, science white papers, and then also, we live in the day and age where a lot of the information is readily available online, and there are online, colleges that are essentially free. They'll just have all of their information posted up there, and you can go through and watch everything.
Yeah,
and so. My weakest point is actually organic chemistry. In fact, I would love to, sit in with an actual tutor and stuff like that because, I do watch videos and stuff that help. I don't have any conventional educational background when it comes to organic chemistry, but I understand how a lot of these things work. And some of the biggest takeaways is, these elements that, regardless of how you're gardening, whether you're gardening organically or you're using synthetic fertilizers, in here, there's a lot of misunderstanding because when we're talking about something like gypsum, which is used for organic cultivation, gypsum in itself is not organic. It is actually a salt, but it's not salt as in what people would think of when they're thinking about salts, because
right, like readily available.
Yeah, it is available. It does have solubility to it, especially depending on the mesh size. So if you're getting something that's 200 mesh, it's going to have way greater solubility if you're going to get something that was granular.
Sure.
So the mesh size is going to contribute to the solubility of a lot of these, but it is a naturally occurring mineral. And what that is, it's calcium, which has a positively charged, molecule attached to sulfate, which is a negatively charged molecule. So when we're talking about chemistry, what a salt is something that is bonded to a positively charged element that's bonded to a negatively charged element. Now, whenever you introduce water, what happens is those things disassociate from each other. Both of those elements, both sulfate and calcium, are beneficial to plants, and microbes also use those things, so it's not detrimental. I think that there's a huge misconception when it comes to using salts versus synthetics and like what they actually are from a chemistry standpoint. So I'll use things like magnesium sulfate, which is Epsom salt, right? These things are all natural. Now
Yeah.
there are other products that are synthetically created, which the detriment that you see there is the overuse or over application can acidify soil. Or when those things are used by an agronomist, they'll address the nutrient aspect without addressing the carbon aspect of the soil, which is the organic matter that's in the soil. So organic is synonymous with carbon when we're
Yeah.
talking about chemistry. And so what happens is uh, you have soil that is acidified by over application of nutrients that also have really low use efficiency. So when you're using something like diammonium phosphate or monoammonium phosphate, those are synthetically created. They're salts, but they're two different things that a plant uses, right? It'll use ammonium and it'll use phosphate. However, because we're usually dealing with really low carbon in ag soils, what happens is they have really low nutrient use efficiency. So if you have 46% phosphate in your starter fertilizer, you're only maybe going to get 10 to 15% of that is going to stay in a usable form, and then only 2% of that is actually 2 to 3% is actually come in contact with the surface of the root. So you have a really low what's called nutrient use efficiency. And if you have a higher organic matter content, some of that carbon will help hold that into solution, hold it into the soil. But the issue is because you have so much of it that's not being used, a lot of it is washed out with rain. It ends up in our waterways, and so that's where we get the detriment effect. Detrimental effects. Same thing with nitrogen. Nitrogen can wash out. Nitrate is an anion. So is phosphate. So they don't really have any. They don't have much to bond to as far as soil colloids or organic matter content, and so they're really easily leached. Now, that's not to say that organics don't have the same issue, because they do. Because if someone over applies manures or composts, you can have the same issue. So that's
Mm-hmm.
why agronomists exist, so they can tell you, hey, you don't want to over apply this, or you can use this in conjunction with this. And so it's really complicated, because you have to look at everything really holistically. You're looking at organic matter, you're looking at things like the exchange capacity, you're looking at the overall base saturation percentages, and then you're looking at what's actually falling into solution. So there's a lot of factors when I'm looking at soils, and then what I would be recommending as an additive. And a
Yeah.
lot of times, like if you have a soil that has a decent amount of phosphorus, you don't need to add phosphorus. Even if your phosphorus solubility is low, what you need to do is you need to get the organic matter higher. You need to get a microbial inoculant to help liberate that, and start
Mm-hmm.
cycling that. So
Nice. So I saw online that you're doing a composting with fungi education class. Are there any other classes that you're teaching, and what do these cost, and is it leading to more sales for Bokashi?
yeah, it's a multiple part question. So one, the composting with fungi class we already did. You can actually watch those podcasts on my Patreon. It's Bokashi Earthworks. I think it's $5 a month. And what I've what I do on the Patreon is I organize all my content. It's all organized on there. So there's inputs, there's things like water quality targets, leaf tissue targets. There's all the podcasts that I've done that have a ton and tons of information. So I organize all of the educational content, and then I offer, the educational courses that I do at Bokashi Earthworks here in Oklahoma City. And we're actually just right down the street from you guys. We're only a couple miles down the road on 50th and Santa Fe. And so we usually do classes here. We've been working on a bunch of back end business stuff, so we're not really offering any classes. We will be starting again next month. But yeah, all of those, we put those on the Patreon as well. But we do things like nutrient dynamics, soil building, Bokashi composting, how to do solid state fermentation. I've done a lot of different things, and we'll be doing more and more of those. And it does help. It's a good way to educate, and then also educate people on the products, how to use these things. And we're going to be doing a lot more of that. It's a good way to have a presence in the community as well. We have a decent sized classroom right out here, so we can fit 50, 60 people if we needed to. And it gives people the opportunity really to learn about this stuff so that they can implement all of the practices. And really what I want to see is I want to see people, growing food at home. I want to see people growing herbs, because that's the path to independence, self-sufficiency, and not relying on others to meet your needs is really the greatest path to independence. And but it's also the greatest path to having a healthier body, because if you have all of the things that you need in your soil, all the nutrients, when we're talking about fertilization, this happens on a cellular level. It's happening on a cellular level in the plant, and it's happening in our own bodies at a cellular level. And so when we have all the zinc and manganese and iron and calcium and molybdenum and all that stuff that's in the soil at adequate amounts, that translates to that getting into our food in adequate amounts. And that's what's fueling our cells and keeping us healthy. And so if we can create food, which at home, you're going to have a higher nutritional density, which means you have more food in your food. You have more nutrition in your food, which is going to mean more complex sugars, more amino acids, more carbohydrates, more minerals, more vitamins. All of those things equate to healthier people, which means healthier minds. It goes full circle. If we are collectively, as a nation, as a people, as a community, however big of a scale we can go, if we can independently cultivate for ourselves and our neighbors, I mean, it would make a huge difference, because I think a lot of people don't understand that most of the produce that we find, whether it's labeled organic or not, is still harvested premature. And so it doesn't have all of the adequate vitamins and minerals that once used to. And the reason why is because most of these things are imported from other countries even. And so what they do is they'll harvest them, and then during transport, they'll ripen them with ethylene gas a lot of times. So that way you have this produce that looks really beautiful sitting on the shelves, but is pretty lackluster when it comes to the actual nutritional profile.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember seeing like a decade ago that the U.S. Department of Agriculture has, over a long time, monitored the average nutritional value in the foods that we're eating. And I saw somewhere that the average apple has like 1/4 of the iron content that maybe an apple in the 50s or 60s did. And so, yeah, I would tell people the old saying, like, an apple a day keeps the doctor away. Well, now you got to eat 4 apples a day to get that same nutritional quality that you were getting, decades ago. And yeah, I'm all about nutritional density. You are what you eat, and your plants are what they eat. If they have, proper nutrition to do what they do, and then they're loaded with that nutritional value, and you consume it, you're better off as well. So I'm 100% on board with what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, so can you tell me briefly about your Bokashi Earthworks product lineup and maybe highlight some of the more popular products that you're selling?
hmm Yeah. So I think that, you know, soil obviously is one of my biggest things. However, it's not really available unless you're like a commercial facility. That's the bulk of it, because it's all most of it is bulk. I'm selling bulk soil, 25 or 100 yards or however much. Uh, and I would love to be able to get that distributed everywhere. So what we're currently working on right now, I was down with my partner down in Texas at the composting facility last Saturday, and we are looking at ways that we can build a soil that is maybe like a light blend, because our current blend is pretty heavy and it's expensive. And while we are less expensive than most of our competitors that would have something that's similar, we blow all of their targets. If we were to do side by sides on saturated paste testing and all that stuff, my targets are specific that I'm trying to meet for cannabis for this specific blend. Now that being said, it's expensive, right? So when you start to do the shipping, bagging, shipping, and then try to sell it to make a profit, and be able to have the retail locations also make profit, it logistically it's really difficult. And so one of the things we're working on is how can we reduce cost? What can we do to make a commercial blend that is going to work as well as the commercial blend, but be able to reduce that cost? And so we're looking into several different ways that we can do that. Like, one of the ways that we were thinking was, I like to use in my commercial blend using pumice. Well, it's a volcanic rock dust, and I use that as a aeration.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I don't use pumice in that mix because pumice is a lot lighter and it can float to the surface. However, pumice is far more expensive than perlite. I mean, I don't like to use perlite, right? Perlite can float to the top of the soil and stuff. So, however, the thing is, perlite is far less expensive. So if I were to switch that out, I could decrease the cost, because ideally I want to make this cost affordable for the consumer,
Right.
And so that's one of the things that we're working on right now. And then the products that actually are kind of like the bread and butter of Bokashi Earthworks is going to be the Micro Plus, which is we manufacture this here in Oklahoma City at our location, and it is a consortium of several different species of bacillus, has a purple non-sulfur bacteria, and a fermentive fungi. Now, I've done extensive testing with another agronomist, and we're able to see the data of what happens. And so you really see phosphorus solubilization. You'll see higher phosphate levels in your saturated paste tests, or it falls into solution in a higher availability when you're using this Micro Plus. So I use it personally every other week as an inoculant in my soils for my plants.
What's the application rate on that?
It's 30 milliliters per gallon.
Okay.
It's not too much, and it's the same thing with the humates. The humates are another one. So humates are it's a little bit different. The humates were developed as a bridge to change the way that conventional agriculture is done, because what I had mentioned earlier about agronomists not addressing organic matter or the carbon content of soils, but they do address the nutrition, typically NPK.
Mm-hmm.
Now, my mentor, Dr. George, he worked on the Apollo space project. He was a engineer, and he has multiple PhDs, and he ended up going into agriculture after he left NASA, and he developed a product. So this is a manufactured product, but what it's manufactured from is lignite, which is just it's kind of like coal. It's a carbon based rock mineral, right? And what this lignite used to be millions of years ago was organic matter. It was trees and all this other stuff that got compact and under time and pressure. And so what they do is they micronize this lignite to down to 200 mesh. So it's a very, very fine. And then they add an organic catalyst, which essentially is it's a it's a it's a nitrogen based organic element that increases the pH when they add it to that. And what happens is it causes an exothermic reaction. And so they control this reaction inside of these vats. And what happens is it allows all of the carboxylic acid, which is the pure humate and fulvate, to react. Everything they separate out at higher pHs, right? So you'll have your humate and your fulvate, and then you'll have your humic acid, your fulvic acid, and then you'll have what's called humate, which is just like all the leftover stuff. And so the leftover stuff kind of falls out of that solution, and then they take all that solution. And what's happened is all of the things like the iron, the calcium, the magnesium, the nitrogen, all of that, because of that reaction that happens, all the fulvic and humic acids chelate all of those elements. And so what's left is and then you can also add in other elements to it. So if you wanted to increase your potassium or your phosphorus or iron, you could add in like iron sulfate, or you could add in the pure form of phosphorus, which is phosphoric acid, right? And what it does is it chelates it with carbon. And so it turns those inorganic compounds that are used in conventional fertilizers, but they turn them into an organic compound during this process. And so everything's carbon chelated now. And so what happens is all of the elements that are in there are now 100% bioavailable, both to the plants and to the biology in the soil. Because when you're adding things in that is attached to carbon, the biology will access the carbon and they'll access the nutrients. And so it has a higher nutrient use efficiency than conventional fertilizers without any of the negative impacts, because it's a carbon based. I mean, you still don't want to just dump stuff on your fields, just like you wouldn't want to dump manures or composts without knowing how much you need. But the idea is that you get to use far less of this, and because you have such a higher use efficiency, and it contains everything in a homogeneous form. So the humate fertilizer has all your NPK, all your micronutrients and secondary nutrients in a homogeneous liquid that can just be applied either as a foliar application or soil drench. And so the idea for this was to be able to bioremediate while cultivating on land, because most people that really talk shit about big ag, which I do on occasion as well. They have some pretty unethical practices, but they also don't understand that there's a lot of benefits, right? Like starvation rate in the world has decreased. Without the way that we farm now, billions of people across the world would starve. Now, there's also a problem with the way that we're farming, is we're acidifying soil. And as soon as we get under a certain point of organic matter or soil organic content, soil carbon, these systems start to break down where they're essentially dead, right? And so to be able to address this, Dr. George was like, look, we can use the carbon, and every time we're fertilizing, we're adding carbon into the soil. And so the idea was to be able to bioremediate that soil and increase the carbon levels while bringing in the nutrition that the plants would need. So he developed this formulation for conventional ag as a replacement to conventional fertilizers. So that way we could be looking at this from its biostimulating properties, because it stimulates microbial diversity and enhances the populations because you're bringing in carbon. You're also addressing the soil nutrition by bringing in things like nitrogen, potassium, phosphorus, calcium, magnesium, et cetera, et cetera. And then we're also addressing the fact that we're no longer acidifying and taking away soil carbon, but we're actually adding it in every time we apply. And so this is one of the things that will be huge, not just in cannabis, but agriculture across the board.
Yeah.
It's used for everything: turf grass, corn. And originally in the 1980s, Dr. George brought it down to South America. He had a plant up and operating down there. The government of Brazil ended up buying out his thing, and then he went out to China. He built some factories out there. He did the same thing in Mexico. We're hoping to build one out here in Oklahoma. And so we have this product. We're just finishing the last of our labeling. We're just waiting for the approval. And then we're going to be back online selling this. And it is one of the products that I think is, it's one of our biggest sellers. And I think it's just because of what it is, and what it has the ability to do. And then also, one of the things that we're working on is making, we have a compostable cup. It's made out of compost manure. And that compost manure can actually be, it can soak up the humate fertilizer. And so we can infuse that biodegradable cup with the fertilizer. And the idea is to do that and then use that for like nurseries who do, things like tomatoes and peppers and flowers. So instead of having a single-use plastic, which you pull your thing out, disturb the roots, and then you have to transplant your plant when you get home, you can just take that whole cup, plant it, and it's going to have the fertilizer. It's going to have everything it needs right at the root zone.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw those, some prototypes you had of those cups, and I texted a buddy of mine. I was like, check this out. Like, it's a cool, innovative product. Looks like it'll be a hit.
Yeah, I'm going to probably be looking for business investors and stuff when we're ready to order the machinery and stuff like that, because what we are essentially going to be doing is creating an assembly line where the humate fertilizer is evenly distributed. It's sprayed onto the cup. In the hope is that countries like Dubai and Nigeria and places that have really poor soils, they can utilize these things and start building up organic matter and have something that they can grow crops with, less water and, without having to do much as far as the fertigation goes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you kind of talked about the microbe plus and the cups there. Do you have any like underrated products that, maybe isn't like a huge seller, but, in your opinion might be kind of like a secret weapon that a lot of growers could be using?
I have a couple actually. So the Kiaha, there's also a blend that we're going to be carrying, which is Kiaha and Yucca.
Nice.
A blend, and it's cold pressed. And so with the cold pressed, there are dehydrated versions of this, but when you have the cold pressed, what happens is you're not losing any of the bioactive compounds through dehydration. Right. So you still get things like the indole-3 acetic acid. You still get that which is different sorts of auxins. You get the cytokinin and the gibberellic acid. So you get the phytohormones. It also has things like calcium oxalate. And it also has things like amino acids in it. And so you're getting all the carbon compounds and all of the stuff along with the 108 plus different saponins. Another product is Calcil. which is it goes under the it goes under the name wollastonite. It's actually a mineral. It's calcium silica. I just call it calcil, and it is it's very fine. And so while it doesn't have the greatest solubility, it does have some solubility, and it is the least expensive way to get silica into your system. And I know that there are people who pay a ton of money for things like Power Psi or for these other silica products, right? And this is a natural mineral, and it will supply you with calcium and silica. So it's super, super fantastic for veg, for getting all that calcium early on and for the transition phase. And then Agsil 16 is another product I like to use. It is essentially it's potassium mixed with sand, and then they heat it, and you essentially get available potassium and available silica. Those are two great products that I highly, highly recommend
Nice.
everybody have in their arsenal.
Nice. So getting into back into living soil, you've been selling a lot of custom smart pot raised beds to your customers.
Yeah.
Are you in favor of soil growing in traditional like round containers or pots? Why or why not? And what do you think would be the biggest advantage of doing living soil in a bed versus individual containers?
Yeah. So I work with different farms who have different methods. I prefer, if you're going to be doing commercial cultivation, that you run beds. I have at home, my personal garden. I just have pots because I move things around and stuff like that. And it's just a really small grow anyway. Um, but there's some advantages to beds, and the main advantage to having a bed is you keep nutritional sufficiency and balance longer. And that's the biggest thing. So if you have a small pot, let's say like a 3 gallon pot, like I have at home in my little tents, I have to top dress more often. I have to water a little more frequently because they dry out faster. I have to fertilize a little more frequently, which means I'm using a lot more. And when you start scaling things out, you want to do less, because the cost greatly increases. So if I were growing in a bed, like, most, I will be, I have a new facility that's coming online. We're just getting everything in order. Most of the people I work with are growing in beds. And the reason why they grow in beds is because those beds will hold nutrients longer because there's a larger volume. There's also what happens is when you're thinking about, at least when I'm thinking about how a lot of these nutrients are taken up by the plant. So mass flow and diffusion. So diffusion is when you have a higher concentration gradient of something. It always travels to a lower concentration gradient to try to create equilibrium.
Right.
And so when you have a larger volume of soil, you're going to be able to diffuse a lot more of those nutrients across that soil to get a little more even distribution. So that's one of the benefits. Also, you have these larger volumes of soil where the roots can spread out further, right? The plant's roots are all going to be intermingling, intercommunicating, and they have a larger space for the mining aspect of how plants take things up. So root inception is really important for things like copper. Root inception is also really important for an aspect of calcium, although most of it is taken up through mass flow. Root inception is, the root hairs and the root tips they need calcium. And so being able to intercept calcium is really important. There's a lot of different aspects to the beds too. You know, you can put your critters in there, like your earthworms. You can put in your beneficial mites, like your Californicus. You can put in things like rove beetles, and they're gonna last longer. It also helps with. I see that that material breaks down a little bit faster in beds as well. So we're usually mulching things into the system, and if you've got all your earthworms in beds, it's harder to maintain uh, colonies of earthworms in pots. It's a lot easier to do it in larger volumes, and so you're going to get a breakdown of the material that you put in, and that's really helpful because what happens is in these beds, when you have that nutrient cycling going on after a couple of runs, you've put all your leaf material and all the stuff that you've pruned off back in there, you start using less mineral amendments as a top dress, because the first couple of rounds, like I'll look at it, you know, you get the soil, it's good to go. You can do a round, which just a fertigation program with the microbes, doing some humates here and there. But you know, you always test after your first run. That way, you can make any adjustments to the soil. Oh, I need to, you know, re-add nitrogen. We need to get the calcium levels back up. We need to add any micronutrients that we need to do. And you know what happens is for the first couple of rounds in a bed, you know, after you harvest, you'll be, oh, we need to do this. You see a lot less amending. So you're going to use a lot less micronutrients. You're going to need a lot less calcium. You're going to just a lot less of everything overall once those beds have a little bit of time on them. And it's because, and this only happens if you're putting your material back into that bed. If you're pulling out your root ball and you're keeping your soil bare without putting any of your leaf back in there, this doesn't happen. This only happens if you're cycling the majority of the biomass that's being produced out of that bed.
Yeah.
So that's one of the benefits. In the smaller pots, well, you can mulch a lot of your material back into that bed. Like the amount of biomass that I'm producing in a 3-gallon pot, it's like overwhelming to put back into it, that small space, you know. So I'm
Right.
cutting it all up really fine and you know, putting it back in there, but it can get to be a lot, and so it doesn't work as well in small pots. It's just the whole process doesn't work as well, and I think one of the reasons is also because if I'm growing in a 3-gallon pot, I don't want to be growing a 3-foot plant. You know, I can't grow a 3-foot. It's just it's to try to keep the nutritional sufficiency, especially with the nitrogen and phosphorus requirement. It's gonna be really difficult. You know, it's gonna be way more difficult than in a bed.
Nice.
But you guys
Totally
make it
makes
easy
sense.
because you know I'll just, if somebody needs something, uh, you know, I tell you guys what I need and we get it done.
Yeah, nice. So, kind of getting into something new that we've been doing. We've been seeing an increasing number of growers who want a bottomless smart pot for their operations where they're using especially raised beds. How are growers utilizing these, and do you have any tips for best results?
Yeah. So what we're gonna be doing is, you know, it's basically just a sleeve. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to find a flat piece of plastic that we can bend, so that way we can keep that thing open while we fill it. It'll be on a little water catch tray, and then the idea is for the plants to establish its root system and veg in there, right? And then the idea is to just take that bottomless pot, put it directly on the bed. That way, it eliminates the time and cost associated with the labor that goes into transplanting beds. So when we're talking about a commercial setting and where maybe a room has 500 or 600 plants, it could take a really long time for a couple of employees to transplant that. I mean, it could take a really long time. So just for them to be able to just load up all of these fabric, you know, sleeves that don't have a bottom on there and just set it on top of the bed and then hook the drip line on there, golden. It just makes things much more simple for the operators, and it decreased costs. And so the whole point of what I'm doing with the soils, the beds, the fertigation programs, all the SOPs that I've developed, the whole purpose of that is to create the highest quality and highest production values that you can in these organic systems, while increasing the profitability, because the overhead is way less. Because I work with like FOS, so if we're using LED lighting, right, you're decreasing. A lot of people are still using HID lighting, and that's very it's very expensive. And so that's a huge part of the overhead and the production cost, right? People who are doing cocoa, I went to a big farm in New Mexico, and they, fill up, 2 or 3 gallon pots with cocoa. And then at the end of the thing, they cut their plant, they toss that cocoa out. They have a whole crew come in, pull all the lines out, toss the cocoa, wash all the pots, fill it back up, place it on there. Thousands and thousands of these things. Now, that's a massive amount of labor. It's a massive amount of waste. Now, a farm like that, they can go in there, they can put in beds, put in soil, and do agronomically, they can do data-driven agronomic cultivation style, where they do their fertigation plan and they go and test the soil every run. Okay, we need to add this, this, and this to bring that soil back up to nutritional sufficiency, make sure all the nutrients are balanced, and then we can continue to run that whole program. Now, what that does is it eliminates a lot of the cost of labor, transplant, the cost of excess material and having to continually buy something that you're going to throw out. And then also using these, fertigating every single day with a nutrient solution that has a really low use efficiency, and then switching over to like a nutrient that you use maybe 4 times, 5 times through an entire plant cycle, veg to flower, right? So the cost savings is huge when you switch over to these types of organic systems, and you're not losing out on quality. You're actually increasing the quality in most cases, because people are not taking in the organic carbon component that happens in the root zone, where you're getting different metabolites that are being produced by bacteria that are increasing the genetic expressions of these plants. So you have greater terpene profiles, you have more unique terpene profiles, you're getting greater combination of cannabinoids, not just, let's say, super high THC. Well, you still can get those good numbers. You'll get a broader spectrum of cannabinoids. And so when we're looking at the quality, I mean, you can't beat it. You can't beat the quality.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, quality, is one thing, but yeah, like you mentioned, operators have to be profitable, and labor costs is probably one of the biggest, ongoing expenses that growers face. So if we can make things easier for them, all the better in the long run. So I saw recently, kind of big Oklahoma news was that they voted down recreational cannabis, and a lot of people that I talked to thought, okay, it's a slam dunk, it's going to happen.
No.
Were you for or against recreational cannabis, and why do you think it failed, and what do you think it means for the Oklahoma cannabis industry?
Okay, so just to be clear, I am for adult use. I'm not going to call it recreational, because we're not out here motorcycling around on our ATVs and stuff. We're not out here playing tennis, or we'll call it what it is, adult use. One. And I was not for this bill. I am for adult use, but I am not for the bill. And that's why it failed. It was because that bill was written by one of the gentlemen who's associated with Metric and some lobby groups. And I am never going to be on the side of any bill that is going to raise taxes or enforce more regulation on American farmers. Because when it comes down to it, whether or not you're just an adult who wants to casually use something, or whether you're using it for medicine, it's becoming more and more of a agricultural commodity. And the perception of the value that comes and is associated with cannabis is based off of prohibition and the
Yep.
legality over, almost a century uh, propaganda and it being illegal. And it's really an agricultural commodity. One of the things that keeps the price where it's at is because it's so highly overregulated, and those things will kind of like, if you just let the market do its thing and let things, good players will continue to do good. People who grow good quality, who have good practices, who are involved in the community, those people will be successful. The bad players who are hemorrhaging money, that don't really give a shit, that underpay their employees, and it's just an investment. Those people will usually fall out. I view this as an agricultural commodity, and I don't think that there needs to be overtax and overregulation simply because of a viewpoint that is inaccurate. This people will always say and revert to safety. Oh, well, we have to make sure it's safe. Safety, safety, safety. And that is really just a key word for, we want to regulate you. We want to tax you. We want a piece of the pie.
Yeah.
Because when it comes down to it, nobody really cares about safety. I mean, we do as farmers, we
Yeah.
care. Like the people who do care, but it's not the legislature. It's not the legislative body. I mean, they'll say that. It's because they want something to pass or because they want to implement something. Us as farmers, we're the people that want to see it, but we don't also, if it was about safety, they would test coffee for mold. If it was about safety, they would be testing, all of our food for pesticides and all that other stuff. But they don't. It's not about safety. It's about regulation. Because without regulation, it really just is an agricultural commodity. And that's what brings the price of the product up is the regulation and the tax and all that other stuff. And so, I'm going to always oppose any bills that tries to overregulate or increase taxes. I want to see a bill that is written into the state's constitution that protects the medical program, the medical side, protects the patients. It gives people, protects their constitutional rights. It protects. I want to see a bill that's going to protect mothers who have children that are using this as medicine for things like seizures or autism or whatever it might be. I don't want to see things like other people have the ability to tell others what they should and shouldn't be doing with their children, or what they should and shouldn't be doing in the privacy of their own home, or regulating what I can grow. And I just don't like that. I'm a less government is good government kind of guy. And so when it comes down to it, dude, cannabis, the people that cultivate cannabis, they're farmers. And if you look at the American farmer, they're like some of the most destitute people. They provide the greatest service to the nation as far as economic, feeding us. And a lot of them are, risk everything every single year. They mortgage their land, they mortgage their property just to get the equipment and the fertilizers and the seed they need to last one more year. And it's like, I don't want to have that be the norm for people who are cultivating cannabis. I want to be able to see people create these vibrant and profitable farm to table business models, these vertically integrated models, and not have all the standards and regulations and make them jump through hoops. It's hard enough to operate a business, a regular business. Like for Bokashi Earthworks, man, we have been growing every year over the past 3 years since we've been in business, but it's been a lesson because accounting, tax, payroll, all the reporting, labeling, there's so much compliance that already goes with just operating a regular business, and on top of all the things that are put on the plates of cannabis farmers or hemp farmers. It's regulation to death, because like I know a lot of people that have gone out of businesses. Yeah, we've had a lot of people come and go in this industry, and it's because the high tax, high regulation. It's like you implement one more thing that could be the straw that breaks the camel's back.
Yep.
It's like Metric did that. When they implemented Metric, there was no customer service. They want to bring on, 15,000 businesses, and Metric didn't increase their customer service by one person. It was a complete shit show. It put people out of business because they had to, they had product that was stuck that they couldn't sell. It cost people tons of money. And then what? Now a business that may have just been getting by now has to hire an additional employee so they can do the tracking and tracing and the computer processing and all the stuff that's involved with that. I mean, again, anytime another person or organization that's not even from this, that has very little information on how these things operate, goes and tries to push legislation that's going to have a negative impact on the livelihoods of the American farmer, I'm totally against it.
Yeah. Your answer like hit me right in my libertarian heart, and I agree 100% with basically everything you said. So, yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself.
It would be conservative though. It would be conservative because if when we're talking about the meaning of words, liberal means more, like a liberal helping of sauce, a liberal helping of law, a liberal helping of legislation. I want conservative. I want less. I want less of all of those things. So I'm really really conservative when it comes to those things because if you look at the amount of um, uh, you know things that a business has to go through, it's so hard. It can be so hard, and it's like one of the reasons I think why these super corporations are they do so well. It's so hard to compete. It's so hard to compete with the logistics. It's hard to
Yeah.
compete with the accounting and taxes and all that stuff because they have, it's just more. Less is more for small business.
Yeah, 100%. And small business is the backbone of our economy. It seems like our state and federal legislators just want to make it harder for small and medium sized business
Yeah.
rather than easier. And big corporations are the ones that win in the end. And it seems like they're the ones who are writing these,
It is.
recreational use laws.
They don't teach civics in schools, and I didn't know why they even called it lobbying. It's because if you go to the House of Representatives, like right down here in Oklahoma, they'll sit in the lobbies of the representatives for each district, and they'll say, "Hey, this is what we want. This is what we want," and they'll bug these people, and the representatives don't really even know better. They just assume that, hey, this is what the people want because this is the only representation that we're getting. It's our kind of own faults if we're not active and we don't like go there and say, hey, this is what's going on, this is what our businesses want. I mean, that's why we started the Craft Farmers Alliance here. We do meetings at the Bokashi Earthworks office. It's for people that I work with and like-minded individuals where we collectively come together and say, hey, look, if we need to put money together to stop a law from being passed because it's going to negatively affect people's businesses, then we can collectively do that. Or if we all need to go down there to the Capitol and sit and talk to these people, we can collectively do that.
Nice.
It's just about being involved, and I wish I could be more involved because I try to do what I can, but it's like that's why they have lobbies and they pay these people because they can go and just do that because it's almost full time to do this, to go and talk to all these people, and it takes a massive amount of time. And I think that's why most of us aren't able to do it, is because everybody's working a 9 to 5 and they're getting they're hustling and stuff. And so all that government stuff falls on the wayside, but it's only the active participation in that where the people take back power, right? And because we are the government essentially. And every time, because I had this attitude like, fuck the government, I have an anarchy sign tattooed on my leg. And I realize now I'm a little bit older, I was just saying basically fuck myself, because each and every one of us has a voice and we have the right to assemble and we can do these things. We can all collectively come together and say, hey, let's talk about what we want. Let's talk about how these people are going to negatively affect our community. And then let's see if, and then let's stand up. Let's collectively be heard. It just takes action, and it takes more of us. It takes, there's strength in numbers when it comes to this government stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, we can send all the emails we want to our representatives, but unless people are getting in their faces,
No, that
are
works
they
too.
really hearing the message?
Emails, no, that works too. Emails, phone calls, showing up in person, all of those things collectively do work. Yeah, it's just a matter of like how many how many people know who their local representatives are? Like, who's the representative for Oklahoma City? Who are they? Who are the representatives for Shawnee? That's the whole thing, is you just need to know who they are. And then if you know who they are, their website has all their numbers, their emails, just call them. Say, hey, I don't like what's going on. Tell your friends. There has been several times when I have posted online the representatives, their contact information, and people calling, even people from out of state were calling, and it helped, and
Nice.
it killed bills.
Nice. Hey, I like to hear that. Brandon, that was basically all the questions that I had for you today. I learned a ton about your operation, Organic Chem, the Oklahoma market. Remind people again how they can get in touch with you.
Yeah. So if you look at the bottom left on the screen at rust.brandon, that is my IG. You can reach out there, or you can go to Bokashi Earthworks, Bokashi Earthworks, all one word, on Instagram, Facebook. There's also the website, which is www.bokashiearthworks.com. We'll be back everything will be backlisted. We're working on all of our labels and stuff like that. But yeah, if you guys are interested in soils, consulting services, SOP packages, we have everything you guys need when it comes to, soil, nutrition, integrated pest management, microbes, fertilizers. I offer everything.
Yeah, the 360 service is what people are looking for these days. And if people, question his, results, check out some of the people who are tagging him in their grows. They're doing awesome
Yeah.
work. So
Yeah. A lot of
the
those
proof
people
is
are
in the
using
pudding.
the smart pots as well. So people like 4-H Farms and Ada, All American Organics, I believe Red Dirt Raced. Man, I'm missing a lot of people. There's so many people. Banana Seat Botanicals, freaking Territory. Man, there's a lot. I can't even think of them all off the top of my head. There's so many.
Nice. Well, on that note, Brandon, it was really great talking with you. Appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us on the Growing Revolution.
I'll talk to you guys soon, and hope to do it again soon sometime.
Thank you so much.